Welcome to Widowed Too Soon, where real-life widows and widowers come together to share their stories of survival, faith, and the journey of finding hope in the darkest of times. Whether you're newly widowed or have been on this journey for some time, each week we're here to provide you with inspiration, practical advice, and the reassurance that you are not alone. You were made to not only survive, but thrive. And now here's your host, a woman who has walked this path herself, who finds solace in writing, joy in speaking, and freedom in dancing like nobody's watching. Michelle Bader Ebersole.
Welcome to Widowed Too Soon. This is Michelle Bader Ebersole. This is our second podcast episode of the year. No, wait. Yes, it's the second. I had to think about what's come out already. It's the first one I'm recording in 2025, and I'm super excited. It's just been so much good momentum within our group. We're growing. I'm seeing each other support each other, and I'm finding lots of great guests. This new guest here today, she came to me just very, very recently. I decided, as you guys know, I'm writing a book, Widow Goals: Steps to Finding Peace When You Lose Your Spouse. And I've been listening to this podcast by Kathy Lipp for a long time, writing at the Red House. And she talked about this, basically an online writing group that she had, and it was going on sale. And so I talked to Joel and I was like, hey, I'd really like to do this. He's like, hey, if you think it'll help you, yeah, go for it. So I think it was New Year's Eve as we were going to do our celebrations. I signed up to be part of the writing collective. And then I met Lisa on the Facebook page. So hi, Lisa. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Good. Yeah. So we're sitting with Lisa Woolery, and we quickly found out from Facebook that we're both widowed and connected on that. You guys know there's an instant bond with people that have been widowed. It's like we've been through this crazy war together. And although our situations are different, we can relate to each other. And so we started talking, and I was like, I've got to have you on my podcast. So that's how we got to today. And I don't even know a ton about Lisa's story, so I'm going to be learning it right along with you. So Lisa, first of all, because I forgot, where do you live? Where are you coming from?
I live in Kansas City.
Kansas City. And something about it snowing there, is like a storm. What's going on there?
We've had like the biggest storm, like sort of blizzard.
Okay.
Well, I've heard in 25 years, I've heard since the 1800s, and I'm a transplant.
Whoa.
I lived in Southern California for 42 years.
Oh, wow.
And I've just lived here briefly, and this is, oh my gosh, so much snow drama.
I'm sure
been crazy.
Yes. Well, we appreciate you still being here today. I mean, that's the great thing about podcasts and writing and the stuff we do. We can do it whether, whatever the weather's doing and all that stuff. So I'm so glad you're here. So we're going to take it back so we can all learn a little bit more about you and your late husband. Tell us how you met him and a little bit about your story together.
Okay. Well, I am so lucky that I get to say I had a life romance. Like I had just such a wonderful experience with my husband. I met him when I was 14 and he was 17 at youth group at church. They had this special night for the soon-to-be high school kids to meet with all the high school kids. And he was, of course, so cool, soon to be senior. Yeah. And we have this whole cute little meet cute about me, like squishing in next to him in the back of the bus with all the senior boys. And I'm like this 14-year-old with metal mouth, like my braces and just like hyper thing. So that we have like a little bit of a meet cute, which I love.
That is so cute.
We dated off and on all through, my high school years. He actually was then in college and volunteered to be a counselor for youth group for the high school kids. And my dad used to always be like, oh, is he going to counsel you? Like, and when we'd go out on a date. And then we got engaged when I was 19, and my parents said that we couldn't get married until I had my degree. So in my fashion, which is like, I want to do what I want, I got married 6 days after I graduated.
Oh, wow.
And then we were married 28 years.
Oh, wow. Wow. And was this in Southern California?
Yes, in the city of Orange, in Orange County.
Oh, in Orange County. Did you grow up like going to Disneyland a lot or
Oh,
anything like
yeah.
that?
My
Yeah.
mom used to drop us off and we'd stay all day. And my
Oh,
dad would
wow.
pick us up on his way home from work.
Oh, that's so fun. I spent one semester down there. Well, actually, two. I went to Life Bible College in San Dimas, California for a little bit. And
Mhm.
then it was when I went to Biola. I went to Biola University that all of our parents got us year passes like to Disneyland. So we just go to Disneyland whenever. It was so
Mhm.
fun.
Yep.
I
Yep.
loved that. Okay, so you guys got married. You were so how old were you then? Like you just graduated, so early 20s?
Yeah, I was 22 and he was 25.
Okay. And then what was your life like? Like what were you doing for work? What was he doing? Did you have kids? Just
Yeah.
walk us through your life.
Well, I had graduated from Concordia University. It's a
Oh,
Lutheran school in Irvine. And
okay.
I
Yeah.
was a school teacher and he
Okay.
was a CPA. And I did that for a while. And then I quit to have babies. We are going to have
Mhm.
all these kids, blah, blah. And then I, as it turns out, am or was whatever, infertile. So
Okay.
we like started to try some infertility things, but it was too stressful. And so we just
Yeah.
quit and decided that we were just going to be dinks, double income, no kids
Oh my
with our
gosh, I've
Labrador
never heard that.
retrievers.
Okay.
So we traveled a lot. I mean, we had great times. We were actually married 17 years before we decided to adopt, and we adopted our two kids
Okay.
from Russia. And that was a
Wow.
great adventure. And my husband was so good at paperwork. So
Mhm.
he did all of these, like, I feel like it's heroic, like all this heroic
Yeah.
paperwork to get us our kids, Liam and Katie. They came
Oh,
when I was 39 and 40. And he
okay.
was a little older, 3 years older than that.
And did they come as babies or how old are
Yes. Liam came first. He was 13 months old.
Oh.
And Katie came second. And it was 18 months later, and she was 18 months.
Oh, wow.
And
And
wow, that like changed our life.
change
Like
your
like everyone who
Yeah.
knows, who has kids, knows that.
Uh-huh.
Although, like, I wasn't pregnant or got to hold like the baby carrier with a little tiny baby, like all of a sudden I had toddlers.
Yeah, that's
And
a lot.
yeah. Um and I was pretty mired heavily into a career which I loved, public relations. And so
Okay.
we had a nanny who had actually been my brother's nanny. And then she came to us. My brother was a little bit younger than I was. And then when I made a promise to the kids that when they were in middle school, which I feel like are the really important formative
Yeah.
years, I would quit. So just before my son, like when my son was in fifth grade, we decided on a huge lifestyle change. And we
Oh,
moved from Southern California to Kansas City, where my
wow.
husband, his hometown. And
Oh, okay.
he
So
was also, and we don't need to talk about this a whole lot, but he was a politician and he was
mm,
a bit controversial in Orange County. And it was very divisive for him and for our family. Well, he loved it. I didn't love it as much. I supported
mm-hmm.
him, but it was just a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And so we moved. He remained a politician and was super commuting. But so we moved to Kansas City, and then
Wow.
8 months later he died. Thank you very much. Like here I am, like in a brand new
Wow. Oh
place.
my goodness.
Um but I also feel like it was God. Like, I feel very strongly about this. And I felt very strongly when, like, even the first night or the second day that Eric died, that it was God leading us to a place of more tranquility and, like, sort of a fresh start. So he was with
Mm.
us in our new town for 8 months. And so I learned where the cool restaurants were. I learned how to drive places, drive in the snow, all these
Yeah.
things. And then we were all nicely settled into our lifestyle. And then he died, but it was a better place than if we would have been in Southern California.
Right. Does he have family in Kansas City? Like, were you
Well, we
moving to
both
family
have
also?
we have the smallest families in the world. And
Oh, okay.
his beloved aunt and uncle, who I absolutely love, they live 45 minutes from us,
Okay.
and they were such a help for us, especially the first year. They came over every Sunday, and we had Sunday
Mm.
dinner together and watched the Chiefs. They actually are retired firefighter paramedics. And when I found my husband, after I called the paramedics, they came and met us at the hospital and took me home and
Mm.
helped me tell the kids. So they're
Right.
just wonderful people.
Yes. So can you tell us a little bit more about the day that your husband died and what that was
Hmm.
like?
Yeah. So he was not super commuting in California. He was here in Kansas City, and he also owned a small CPA firm here. And so he had worked. And then it was about 4 o'clock, and I heard the garage door open, and I went and greeted him because I loved him so much. I still greeted him at the door, and he gave
Yes.
me a kiss, and he was just positively glowing. And he just had the cutest outfit on. Um, and I just remember that so vividly. And he gave me a kiss and said, "I have so much to tell you about my day." And I was like, "Oh, good." He goes, "But I got to go make some calls and answer some emails first." And I said, "Okay." And then I went back to reading. I'm a total bibliophile, so I'm always reading.
Yeah.
And about like 4:15-ish, I got up from my chair and went in his office and like peeked in and said, "I'm going to make dinner." And he said, "Okay." So I went out and I chopped broccoli and I put it into steam. And then I was going to go tell him a joke because we were dieting, because we had discovered like Midwestern food, like so
Oh.
good. And so we both needed to diet a little. So I was going to tell him a joke because he thought I was so cute and funny still after
Yeah.
28 years. And so I walked down the hall and I was going to tell him, "You're going to fall asleep during dinner because it's steamed broccoli." Like, I knew he would laugh, and then we'd talk about our Mrs. Dash
Yeah.
options. And I opened the door and he was like leaning funny. And like
Mm.
my first second or tenth of a second, I thought he was fiddling with our internet because it took a while to get the internet working well at our house. The second thought was he's playing a joke on me. And then the third thought is, "Oh my God, my husband's dead." So I ran over and picked up his phone and called 911. And I remember just like screaming, I think my
Yeah.
husband's dead. And the 911 guy is saying, "Okay, well, you've got to get him on the floor to do compressions." So, and PS, I somehow remembered my address because, I
Mm.
was kind of new and like learning a new
Yeah.
address. Um, so I was like, I just remember this conversation so vividly. I'm like, I can't move him on the ground. He's huge because he was 6'2", I'm 5'2".
Yeah.
And so he was a big guy, like
Mm-hmm.
not unhealthy and fat, just like a big guy. So I pushed him out of the chair and rolled him over. And I remember already seeing like little purple under his eye. And I knew he
Mm.
was dead, but I did the compressions anyways, and like did it with the 911 operator. And Eric had just had a physical the week before, and he just had like the cleanest bill of health. Anyways, so I heard all the sirens coming, and I got up and I ran outside and I flagged them down, and then they all came in. And then like as I backed out of the room, I remember like I had to call people. Like my kids were around the corner swimming at a new friend's house. I didn't even know their names. And so I called my neighbor whose son they were with, and she's a nurse. She was actually in a surgery, and I was like, "Eric's dead." And she's like, "What?" So she just called her husband, and he came home from work and got the kids and put him in his basement, and a police officer came, and they worked on him for 40 minutes. And that time I called my aunt and uncle, and the battalion chief like took the phone from me each time and was a little more coherent. I called my best friend who lives in Phoenix, and she was actually at my house that night by midnight.
Oh.
Um, so yeah, that's what
Wow.
happened.
Was it a heart issue?
Yeah, he just had sudden heart failure.
Wow.
And
That's
I looked at the autopsy, but I didn't understand it. I asked my aunt, and she kind of explained it to me, and I don't really understand, but I'm just not a detail person. I don't care. Like, he's dead.
right.
It doesn't really
Right.
matter to me. Like, the
Right.
details of how or why his heart stopped.
Right. It's unfortunately very common. Like so many widows that I've interviewed recently, it's all something to do with the heart. So many really similar stories. Just had a clean bill of health. One was running on a treadmill. I mean, just it's crazy to me how often this happens. So tell me about what it was like telling your kids. What was that like? And how old
Well,
were they at that time?
yeah, they were tweens. Let's see,
Mhm.
12 and 10.
Mm.
And so, they worked on him for 40 minutes. The battalion chief came to me and said, we've worked on him for 40 minutes. We can't revive him. It's time for us to take him to the hospital. And I was like, okay. But then as we're driving to the hospital, I'm like, well, why are we going to the hospital?
Right.
Like, anyways, so we got there and they took him in, and then I met Larry and Chu. They were actually waiting for us at the emergency room entrance. And the battalion chief came and said that somebody had to go in and see him, but he was dead. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And so my aunt went. And then she came out, and the battalion chief said, do you want me to take you home and help you tell your kids? And I looked at Larry and Chu, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to tell my kids that their dad is dead. Like, how do you do that?
Wow.
And so Larry and Chu said, we'll take her. And then on the way home, I'm like, what do I say? And Chu said, you just tell them what happened. Give them the facts.
Yeah.
So I texted our neighbor, and pretty soon my kids came just like bursting through the door, because they had been like sequestered in our neighbor's basement, and they had heard the sirens. So they knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And so they burst in the door, and they looked at me, and then they looked at Larry and Chu, and then Katie started screaming, where's Dad? And so I just said, well, Daddy died. I went and I found him in his office, and the paramedics couldn't revive him. And just, if you want to know, like, I know a lot of you listeners know what the sound of anguish is. It's the sound of two kids screaming because their dad is dead, screaming like, I don't want just a mommy, I want a daddy. And it's just awful.
Yeah. There's nothing like seeing your kids cry over their dad, like, or their mom, like whoever, just watching your kids like go through that. It's like you're having your own heartbreak, and then your heart breaks again because you're watching your kids, and I know a lot of people that are listening can relate to that. They understand that pain that you can't really describe. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is so hard. We have both kinds of deaths interviewed on this. We've got the sudden deaths, we've got the long deaths. They're all hard. They're all hard. But I think like there's the shock of not knowing is just this whole other layer that I never went through, where you have no idea. And I can just imagine how devastating that is. So what was it like after that? I mean, you had no idea, and then your life completely changed. So what was it like the next few days, weeks? What was life like as a new widow?
Well, I was like on such autopilot.
Yeah.
I feel like the 911 operator flipped the switch and put me on autopilot, because how else could I have given my husband CPR? How else could I go to my husband's funeral? How else could I, like, I gave his eulogy. His eulogy was our meet cute. I had written it for him as a Valentine's gift. Like, how could I do all these things? And then to add, like, I guess, insult to injury, his death certificate was delayed because there was an investigation, and there was a staffing shortage. And so since I didn't have his death certificate, I couldn't access anything. And then I went to the bank, because I went to his business bank And then she told me that I needed to go to all the banks and report his death. Otherwise, there would be identity fraud. And so I was so scared. So I immediately went. And then all that did was made it so all of my assets were frozen
Oh no.
until the death certificate came. Because the
Ugh.
way we set up bank accounts, joint bank accounts in California is different from
Okay.
Kansas City. And so I wasn't like, well, I was, but they didn't bother to do the research. They like illegally froze my assets,
Wow.
but like I didn't know. And I was like taking everyone at their word because that's all I could do.
Mm-hmm.
So he died a week before my son started middle school, which wasn't super optimal, and my daughter then 5th grade. And so we went to California for the funeral, and then we came home and they missed a few days of school. But I was like, okay, we got to get up and at it.
Yeah.
We're going to put on our big girl and boy pants and we're going to do our things every day. And so I got up every day. I plastered a smile on my face and they went to school. And then I started my job, which was to just unsnarl this financial issue that I was in. And so that took a while. And I finally got the certificate at about 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Because I finally got up the nerve to call up the coroner. And I'm like, what? You're a public service officer, not service, like a police officer, however you say that. A public servant. And you're elected to the people of Johnson County to protect us. And I am about to be foreclosed on because I wasn't really, but little hyperbole never hurt. Because your office is understaffed. Like, what's the additional investigation that you're doing? Like, the police haven't contacted me, like nothing. Like, I need the certificate. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'll have it to you. And she did. I was like, wow. What? That's all it took. But man, I gave her a speech.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I'm sure.
so then it took a while. Like, in the meantime, I had a Porsche 911, which I sold, and I sold my husband's gun collection. Like, don't judge him. He had 74 guns. But he never judged me for the amount of shoes I have. So anyways, so those two things in the bank, like, kept us going. And then pretty soon I got Social Security and then access to everything. And so within, like, it still took a while. Like, it took me a year before I think my finances were stable, but I don't know that that's super unusual to like it be a while before everything is financially secure.
And what about support? Did you have a good support system? Like, people around you? But you had just moved, so.
I had just moved, but I had made a super good friend in the neighborhood. And she was great. And her husband was a businessman. So he helped me. Like, I had to sell my husband's business. And so he helped me find an attorney and kind of got me started on some things. And my neighborhood was so wonderful. They just wrapped their arms around us. We didn't have to cook a meal from August to November. And they just would bring meals by and I'd stick them in the freezer. And then if there was a night where I didn't have a meal, I'd just get one out. And they just did all kinds of things. They mowed my lawn. Like, one day I went outside. There had been a thunderstorm and there was a huge branch in my yard. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with this? And so I went inside and cried and came out and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? And it was gone because someone had come by and taken it. And people were just so good to us. And then another woman who became a very close friend, I had not met her. She had met Eric, and she just kept bugging me. She's like, come over today. And I'm like, who is this person? Like, I don't have any capacity for new friends right now. Like, my husband just died. So I finally went to her house and she opened the door and she just like put her arms around me and said, tell me everything. And so I did. And then she would come over and she brought me food for the kids. She'd take me out for
Wow.
lunch. She called it J Payday, and she'd use her husband's card.
Oh,
And
cute.
just she'd like take the kids shopping for my birthday, and just wonderful.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing.
So I think that's like sort of proof of why
Yeah,
God moved us to the Midwest.
right.
I mean, my neighbors were great in California, and people are great in California, but there was something really special about this neighborhood. It was
Yeah,
just really Midwestern nice.
right. Yeah. And so you can see looking back like why that was
Hmm.
meant to be that you were there.
Yeah.
And so what were things like for the kids? How were they doing those first few months? How did they
It
handle
was
everything?
it was tough.
Right.
I mean, they loved their dad so much,
Mhm.
and he was such a good dad, and it was really hard. Like the first weeks trying to get them to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then it turned into Sunday night angst. And I used to give
Oh.
them Benadryl because
Mhm.
like they had to get to sleep and I had to get to sleep. But I feel like getting them on their regular routine was very helpful. And they had
Yes.
great friends too and great support system. The school was wonderful. And I kind of learned that importance of routine when I brought them home from the orphanages, that
Mm.
they needed like a really steady routine of like
Mhm.
nap time. And we didn't even go out very much. We just had like this, we just hunkered down and healed. And so I
Yeah.
think that I could transfer that over to when Eric died, is we hunkered down and we healed. And we did our routine, we did our things. But long lasting, there were a couple of issues. My daughter was extremely stressed to not be near me. And
Oh,
so she
right.
was afraid to go to someone's house. She was afraid. Like, finally, I got to the root that she was afraid if she left me, I would die. And I'm
Right.
like, well, honey, no. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I mean, I was a lifeguard and a pool manager for many years. And how many times have I taken CPR and first aid? Like, if I couldn't revive dad, you couldn't
Right.
have, because she used to feel guilty. Like, if she had been there, maybe he wouldn't
Oh.
have died. I'm like,
Mhm.
no, if I couldn't revive him, you couldn't either. And like, I kind of was really direct, like
Mhm.
that you can't, I know you feel like you're the center of the world, but you're not. Like, it was dad's time. So
Yeah.
there's nothing you could have done. It was his time. Like, we
Mhm.
talked about that a lot. It was his time. And then COVID happened. And so the kids came home. And then I didn't send them back to school because of just the instability of it. I felt like they didn't need any more instability in their
Right.
lives. So I ended up homeschooling for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
And then my son became depressed and apathetic. And so I ended up like researching something for him where he could thrive and he could get something that he needed that I couldn't give. And so I sent him to military school.
Mm.
And it's the same school my cousins went to. And he's still there. He's 17 now and he's doing so well. Like,
Mm.
that was like, I'm here. Can you say I'm patting myself on the back?
Yeah.
Like, that was a good mom move. Like,
Yeah.
I just really needed something different for him, because I couldn't send him back to the local public school because he's such a good little, like, con man. And he would just con everyone out of doing his work. And so he was like so far behind in math. So I just needed something different for him.
Wow. I love that you figured out what would be best for him, even though I'm sure it was hard, like having him leave and all of that stuff, but you did
Oh,
what
I
was best
still
for him.
cry. I
Yeah.
still cry every time he leaves. Like, he left yesterday. I put him in his Uber to go meet his carpool because of the snow. Like, I
Yeah.
couldn't drive in there. And they were delayed 2 days too. But like, I walked in the house and I just cried.
Right.
And every time I drop him off at school, I cry. But
Mhm.
I also know that it was the right decision, and I feel very confident about it. Like, I got a lot of like negative reviews from people
Yeah.
on sending him to military school, but I was like, I'm not going to listen to any one of you, because in the end, I am the only person on earth who cares if he graduates from high school. So I'm
Right.
going to do what I need to do.
Mhm. You have to do that as, when your spouse dies, you do become that only person. Like, it's hard that there's no one else on earth that loves them as much as you. Like, grandparents and other people can be a close second, but there's no one who loves them as much. And that brings grief to me sometimes. Like, I'm remarried and Joel loves my kids, but he's never going to love them like their dad did. Like, there's just something about that other parent. And so I think a lot of us probably grieve that, from time to time about like, okay, there's no one else who gets it. Like in a good moment, there's no one else who would feel it as much.
Yes. And I like to think or say to people that I lost my person to succeed with, but I also lost my person to fail with.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Like I don't have anyone to
true.
fail with anymore. It's just me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been a little while. Let's talk about your life since then. So how long now has it been since
5.5
passed away?
years.
5.5 years.
Yeah.
So what do you think has been the biggest thing that has helped you, to see joy again in life and to succeed? And you're doing a lot of great things that we're going to talk about. What's helped you the most?
Well, I think my willingness to embrace it.
Oh, that's good.
Like I remember just I'm not going to let this beat me.
That's good.
And also my faith, although my faith has been a rocky road since Eric died. I mean, I should say in the beginning it was. I've always had a great faith, and Eric used to joke and say, your faith, like God always blesses you. I'm just along for the ride. And like I had a walloping decades of like blessings and like easy life. And woo.
That changed.
Yeah. I'm not going to say I lost my faith at all, because I knew that God was right there next to me, but I was mad.
Yeah.
And mad. And also like, I just had like this block of my faith. And I'm like, I'm just going to put this over here on hold. And I know that God is going to wait for me. And I know that he is helping me right now, even though I can't feel it or can't even, like, I'd go to church. I took like 6 months off at church too. Actually, it was great that COVID closed the churches, because then like I didn't have to be like, I'm not going to church. But I don't even remember praying. And when I did go to church, I would just sit there and cry and like submit to what had happened. And then it was probably 6 months later, I was walking down the stairs, and I know you asked me to keep in mind some verses.
Yeah.
And this was the first verse, like as a widow, and like, I'm going to read it to you. I don't even need to read it. I just know it. And it's going to make me want to cry, because even today, 5.5 years later, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for hope and a future. It's Jeremiah 29:11. And, I know all you widows out there know what it's like to have worked for your whole adult life on the plans that you had with your husband. And now those plans are all gone. And that's so scary. And so I had forgotten. I had a little sign that I got at Hobby Lobby with that on it. And it was at the base of the landing of the stairs. And I was running down the stairs one day, and I slipped and fell and landed on my butt. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I broke my collar or my tailbone, but I didn't. And I just stopped and I looked, and there was that verse. And I was like, oh, well, thanks, God.
He wanted you to see that again.
Yes. Yeah. And I just cling to that so much, because I know that God has a plan for me. And even these 5.5 years, my plan has unfolded quite nicely. So I can appreciate that. But I don't know that I was ready to hear that at first.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's okay for people to know, like, it's okay to be angry. I was angry for a while. Like, it's okay to talk to God about those things. Or if you can't talk to him, like, he still knows your heart. He still hears you communicating, and he can take it if you're angry. It's okay.
Well, when I finally did start praying again, a lot of times what I would say to him is, this is BS, but I'd actually say it out.
Right. And that's okay.
I'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird. In my prayer, I just cussed.
God can handle it. It's okay.
Yes, he can. He really can.
Yeah. And so he wants us to just be like, he wants to meet us where we're at. And I think that's important for listeners to know, because I know we're at all different places with our faith, and that God's okay with wherever you're at. If you're angry, if you're sad, if you're happy, if you're joyful, like wherever, God can take your heart and heal it. Like that's really what he wants to do. He wants to turn our mourning into dancing and make beauty from our ashes. And I know that's something that's really important to me, and I know that's important to you as well. So tell us about like what you do now. What's your, I see you as what I call a widow influencer. Just my little term that I have.
I love it.
I know. I was telling my husband about you the other day. I'm like, well, she's one of the widow influencers. He knows what that means now, because I have a lot of friends who their heart is widows, and so they're widow influencers. So tell us about what you do.
Well, it's really interesting because when I quit, so when we moved from California to Kansas City, I decided that I was, going to end my career in public relations. But my husband promised me, like, this is your time. You can write that rom-com, because I had a rom-com that I had been writing here and there. But as a working mom, like, who has time for that? And so I had written quite a bit of it, and then I wasn't feeling very rom-commy after Eric died.
Yeah, I wonder why.
And so I just, like, that book will never surface, although maybe parts of it will in some other form. But I started writing. I had a blog called My California Exodus, and all these people wanted to know about Eric and how we were doing, and I just got tired of all the texts.
Yeah.
And so I would write a blog post every week and just say how we were doing. Like the first one I wrote was I recounted how he died. And then if somebody would text, how are you guys? Oh, we're good. And then I just send them the link to my latest blog, because it was just like so much, like I'm complaining about all these people caring about me, but you know how like that gets to be so much.
It. Yes, yeah. I did a podcast where when Luke was sick, like it was something else, but I turned it into updates because I was tired of telling everyone. Yeah. So every week would just be an update, and I tell my friends to listen to it. So same concept. Yeah. I get it.
Yes. Yeah. And so then I'd share it with my aunt, and she's like, you know what, you should make this into a memoir. And I was like, maybe I will. And then I went to this retreat that was hosted by Dani Shapiro. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's a memoirist. And she wrote this really prolific memoir a few years ago called Inheritance. It was about how she found out that she wasn't actually genetically linked to her dad or her Akhenazi Jewish conservative community. That she found out later, she's a reporter, and she found out later that she was conceived with sperm from a sperm bank of a Swedish doctor who lives in Oregon. Anyways, it was this. So I had read the book and I loved it. And then I looked in the back and so then I Googled her. And then the first thing that came up was this retreat. So I went to this retreat and got some info and kind of thought, I think I want to do this. And so it took me a while to shape it and figure out what my ending was going to be. But I ended up writing a memoir, and it's called The Widow's Comeback. And it's my first 2 years after my husband died. And it just recounts some of the grief, but it also recounts, basically the reason that I am publishing it is because I want widows to know that it's okay to be a hot mess widow. You're going to have like, every widow has some area where they're just like a hot mess, and it's okay. And you're going to be okay. And it's okay. Like, I feel like too, I don't know if you agree with me, but I feel like widows kind of almost have to be sort of perfect. Like everybody expects us to be like all wise and how we grieve, and like our kids are supposed to be under control, and like we're supposed to have our fun. Like, I just feel like everyone just expects me to be better than I could be. And so like my hot mess area was men, and I dated a lot. And so I wrote my memoir sort of rom-com-ish. So like you'll cry, but you'll also crack up. And
Yeah,
just
can't
some
wait
of
to
the
read it.
things, some of the things that happen are funny and super embarrassing. But I decided that I was gonna, like this one particular scene, I called up my best friend and I told her what had happened. And I said, oh my gosh, I am never sharing that in my memoir. And she goes, yes, you are. Widows need to know that
Yeah.
you did that because they did it too.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. And so my memoir's been done for a while. It's just coming out.
So excited.
But it took me a while before I could really own
Yeah,
my Aunt
I get
Mess.
it. Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. I cannot wait to read that. What's the best way for our listeners to stay like updated with what's going on? Do you have like a newsletter they can sign up for, or what is going to be the best way so we can make sure we get that book when it comes out?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you.
Mhm.
Well, it'll be available on Amazon. And again,
Okay.
it's called The Widow's Comeback. But also, please follow my page, thewidowscomeback.com. If you go there, I have a freebie for you
Oh,
that's
perfect.
7 ways to survive the loss of your spouse. And it's
Oh,
just
that's
like my
good.
7 biggest learnings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they're really helpful. And so you can
Perfect.
go to my page and you can also sign up for my newsletter. I send it out every month and it talks about what's going on in the month and how as a widow you can deal with it. Like
Oh,
we
I
did a
love
lot
that.
of like how to survive around the Christmas tree or around
Yeah.
Christmas, how to show up at Thanksgiving. In my January, I talk about the importance of accomplishments when you're a widow. Like once the grieving is done, the raw grieving is done, why like accomplishments are important. And I talk about vision boarding. Um,
Nice.
February will be about Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
So you can sign up at thewidowscomeback.com. And then I also have a Facebook page, The Widows Comeback.
Oh,
And
perfect.
I do a lot of live teachings on it. So I'll
Oh,
have like a
awesome.
guest. I just talked with my friend who's a therapist the other day on there. We talked about, again, accomplishments. I talked about the 5K that I ran. But widows, I'm not saying you have to like go out and do these huge accomplishments. That
Right.
comes later. In the beginning, like my first accomplishment after getting the kids to be able to go to bed was making an omelet. Like I decided
Right.
I wanted to learn how to make an omelet. So I felt so accomplished and like it really gave me some confidence and like the accomplishment gives you some dopamine. And plus now I was like had this specialty omelet that I made. So
I
um
love that.
yeah, so we did a teaching on that. So I just go live a lot every Monday morning at 8. I do 8 o'clock Central Time. I do prayers for widows,
Oh,
and
so awesome.
so I have like a bunch of widows that I pray for. And if you want me to pray for you, I will. You can just email me at lisa@thewidowscomeback.com and I'll add you and I'll pray for you every week.
I love that. Well, we'll definitely be putting the links to all of that. And on the Widow Too Soon community page, feel free to share any of those links yourself
Oh,
too.
great. Thank you. I
Anytime
will.
you can do that. I think it's so crazy how similar what we're doing is in different ways that
I
we have.
know.
And we just met through the Writers Collective, which I don't even think was maybe about the writing. I think it might have been about meeting you as well.
Oh, I agree.
That God put it on my heart to do this right now, and that you found me right away when I joined, because we both have the same heart. We're doing the same things, but different way. Like it's crazy, even down to like the book, and then you're, praying. So when we started, Mark, my old co-host, and I started Widow Too Soon, we used to go on Instagram like once a week and pray for widows and widowers. And that was huge. So you're reminding me how I'd love to, I might do that on my Widow Too Soon community page and go back to that, because there's so many people that need prayer. And that was so powerful to literally pray for people right there. And I love that. So I'm definitely going to be joining your group and putting all the links out there. So you said some really interesting things. So I'm like dying to read your book. Can't wait to do that. But in the meantime, could you share just a teeny bit? We don't have to give away the whole book, but I'd love to know like a little bit about your dating experience that you've had and kind of where you're at now.
Sure. So I buried so deep this concept, which was my life is broken.
Yeah.
I fix it with a new husband and a new dad. And so it was buried so deep, I didn't realize what I was doing. But at the same time, I didn't think anybody was worthy of that. So I became an expert at the first date. Like I went
Yeah.
online and I would just go out on first dates. And I
Right?
mean, like it was almost a hobby.
I
And
know.
and then I got tired of that, and so I decided I gave myself some false deadlines. Okay, I'm going to have a boyfriend now. And so like the first guy that comes along, oh, he's my boyfriend, and he's not. No.
No.
And then I finally, then it was the last man standing was Joe. And Joe,
Mhm.
if you're out there listening to this, hi, I love you. Thank you for the wonderful things you did for me. But we were not meant to be together. And I dated him for a whole year, and he
Wow.
practically moved into my house, into the guest room.
Mhm.
And then like I started getting like messages or whatever from the Holy Spirit, like it's time to break up with Joe. And
Oh,
I
wow.
literally said to God, I am not strong enough. If you want me to break up with him, you're going to have to arrange it. Within 2 weeks, huge thing, and we were broken up.
Mm.
Which started me on a journey of caring more about who I gave my time to. But now I'm in this thing with God where he wants to be my husband.
Mhm.
And I've accepted that, but I'm still learning exactly what that means. So that doesn't mean I'm not going to have an earthly husband someday. I might, but I'm learning how to trust God for each and every little thing. So anyways, that's not all in my book. My book ends with Joe. He's Mr.
Okay.
Hardware. And it
Hardware.
ends
Okay.
with like, I've got a great future in front of me. Is it with Mr. Hardware, or is it, how is it? So I basically sort of go through a lot of the hot mess boyfriend stuff and also just the hard life stuff. And then I end it with like the beginning.
Mm.
Like that's the
Yeah.
last line of my book. I just gave it
Wow.
away. The beginning.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I love that you're saying that God is your husband. I did that for a period of time too, and it was this beautiful. It was probably the closest I ever felt to God, actually,
Mm-hmm.
when it was like, okay, instead of going to a husband, like I'm asking God every little thing. What should we do about this? What should we do? And it was just this beautiful, beautiful time. And I love that you're embracing that and really, I think that's really important for a lot of our listeners to hear too, because we can be in that place where we're just like, okay, I need a new husband. Like it's, yeah, it's a fine line with dating after widowhood. Like, are you ready? Are you not ready? That kind of thing. Does God have the
Mm-hmm.
person for you right away? Is it going to take a while? Like, I don't understand God's ways. Like, I don't understand. Like, I have friends who've been widowed a really long time that want to be married and they haven't found anyone. It just, I don't understand God's ways, but I love that in the in-between time right now, you're just like, okay, God, like it's you. Like, I don't
Yeah.
I don't need
Can
someone earthly.
I read you a verse?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hosea 2:14-16. But then I will win her back once again. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her there. I will return her vineyards to her and transform the valley of trouble into a gateway of hope. She will give herself to me there, as she did long ago when she was young, when I freed her from captivity in Egypt. And here's the kicker. When the day comes, says the Lord, you will call me husband instead of master. And I read that and
Wow.
was pissed. I'm like, well, what? You're going to take me to drinks? I'm going to sit on your lap? Like, and so like on this particular journey, I'm learning more and more about how God can be my husband. And I'll just give you a quick little example. So this is another snow incident that happened at Thanksgiving weekend. It snowed, and I was worried about getting my mom to the airport and getting out of my driveway, which is a hill. And I was just stressed about it. And my son comes up, who, by the way, wants to be a military chaplain. And he came over and
Awesome.
gave me this big hug, and he goes, Mom, you can give your cares to God. He's gonna be there for you. And I just looked at him and I said, oh, right. Like God's gonna drive grandma to the airport. And this is my thing with God all the time. Oh, what? You're gonna drive my mom to the airport? And within 5 minutes, the phone rang, and my friend would be driving right by my house, said, oh yeah, I'm going to pick up my son at the airport. And I was like, oh, can you take
Wow.
my mom? And he said, yeah. And
That's
I was like,
amazing.
oh, thanks, husband.
Wow. That's
And I've had
amazing.
several incidents like that when I'm like in a real bind, and then I'll just stop and I'll say, okay, God, you want to be my husband? Solve it. And he does.
That's beautiful. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Like he loves us in such a like intimate, caring way, like a husband. He wants the best for us. He wants to protect our heart, guard our heart, all of those things. And it's so beautiful. I'm just remembering this song that I used to listen to, I think right when Luke was sick. It was about dancing. Like I would pretend I was dancing with God. Oh, I'm going to remember it and link it. It was something like dancing. I don't know, but it was like I was dancing with God and I would always envision this. And I feel like that's how he loves us. So it's hard to understand for our human brains to comprehend, but he loves it.
Yeah.
I love it when he shows up in these ways that you're like, that was totally God. Like there's
Yeah.
no way to explain this. Like
Yes. Yeah.
it's just the way that he does things is so beautiful. And when I stop and I think about those things in my life, I can always like trace it back to like, okay, God did that totally, and sometimes in our brains we can be like, no, I don't know, but no, God did it. Like if there's something
Yeah.
like that, like God did it. I mean, even us sitting here today, God did it. Like
Yeah. Yes.
just all of it is always so beautiful for me to see is the way that he loves us and sends like, like God winks, like little things from God that you're like, oh my gosh, that was totally you. So wow, that's beautiful. I'm so excited about your book and all the things
Thank
you have
you.
going for you. I'm excited to get to know you better through all of our writing and all the things that we're going to do with that and where God wants to take us. So what advice would you give to a brand new widow?
I'm going to tell you, but first I forgot to say, along with my book, I have a workbook. It's
Oh,
a
very cool.
365-day grieving journal.
I love
So
it.
it helps you plan for the hard days.
That's an
And
amazing
then,
idea.
yeah. And then there's also some exercises inside to do.
Okay. So is that
Yeah.
going to come out when the book comes out?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm getting both of those and
It's
a
like
great
about to enter the presses.
Hey, that's awesome. And that's also
Yeah.
like a great gift as I meet new widows. I love that. That's perfect. Such a great idea. So anyways,
Thank
what advice do you have for new
Yes.
widows?
So I think the most important thing that I want to say to widows is that your life is not over. And I remember like the second day after Eric died, I remember exactly where I was walking down the hall. And I was like, oh my gosh, my life is over. It was a good life, but it's done. And I was, spiraling about that and everything else. And then my widow friend texted me and said, you might feel like your life is over, but it's not. And then I remembered and I could see she had a new city, a new husband, like a whole new life. So new widows, I want to say your life is not over. And I'm not going to lie, you have to walk through some really dark, scary days, but you can do it.
So
And then you
good.
come out on the other side and you're like you, but a new you. And it's scary to think that be excited or whatever about the new you because it's the new you without your love, but you'll come out and you'll be surprised at how you've grown.
That's so good. That's such good advice because in the moment, in the beginning, you do feel like your whole life is over. How can I survive without my spouse? Doesn't seem possible. I remember, so my hospice nurse, well, not Luke's hospice nurse was a really strong Christian and we became really good friends. And after Luke died, I remember her saying, you're not even going to recognize your life in a year. Like it's going to be so different. And I didn't believe it. In a year, I was in a new house, which that's a whole thing, whether you move or not. But I had already planned to move before Luke died. I knew I wanted to move closer to my parents and everything. Like I was in a new house, new career, it was just so different. I remember being like, wow, she was right. Like it doesn't have to stay where it's at. We didn't want these things to happen to us, but God truly can make beauty from ashes. I mean, you're living proof of it. I'm living proof of it. So many widows I know are living proof that this is not where we need to stay. The enemy wants us to stay in isolation. I see it over and over and over on the widows groups, like people what they're posting and they want to be alone and that's not where God wants you. Like, I want to encourage you, listeners, like, even on the group, reach out to somebody. Like, we want to be there to give you, like, to be there and give you life. Like, well, God give you life, but listen to you. Like, we're made to do life in community. So don't isolate yourself, even if you're tempted to do that. And life isn't going to always feel like it does today. Like, that was the thing. I actually knew widows before I was widowed. I knew 7, I believe. God had already put all these people in my life. I called them all and was like, does it get better? You know, they were able to encourage me that it does, and it's not always going to feel like that. And that's all I needed to know in the beginning, that I'm not always going to feel like this. So this is your encouragement, because I know a lot of our listeners are brand new widows, that it's not, you can't even imagine like life down the road, 6 months, a year, but God's going to heal your heart in amazing ways.
And I like what you said, the enemy is going to keep you closed off. And, and so I say this, like, young widows, new widows, you're going to need to grieve. And that's like huge emotions, but you're going to come down from that a little bit. And you got to, like, I'm just going to give you a gentle little loving kick in the butt. You have to look for things to do. Like I said, make an omelet. I joined a hiking club. I play pickleball now. Like, it's so scary the first time you go and do these things.
Yes.
Like, my first hike that I went on, it took me a year to get up the nerve to actually go on a hike after I joined this club. I started crying and I burst out, my husband died. So it's hard to do these, to go and do things, but you have to, because that's what helps you move forward, and you want to move forward, and you can.
That's huge. That's awesome. So one more question. What do you think has been the most challenging thing about being widowed?
Well, definitely raising kids by myself is the hardest.
100%. I hear you. I hear you in that one. Well, this has been amazing hearing your story. And it's just so exciting when I meet another widow who has the same widow's heart for widows. You know, sometimes I'm like, okay, God, why am I still here? We're about the same time, 5-ish years. It'll be 5 years for me in May. Why am I still here doing a podcast, doing all these things? I could be like, okay, thanks God, you healed me. I'm done. I'm out. Like, I'm moving. I'm not doing widow work anymore. And believe me, there's moments that I've thought of giving it up, but it's like, I listened to this book by Bob Goff, something like that today. And it's called Undistracted. I was listening to audio while I was working out, doing stuff. And he was talking about like, doing what God put before you until he says to leave. And I was like, wow, like, this is my calling. This is what I've been called to do. And if he allowed me to go through this, I want to keep giving. There's going to be, unfortunately, new widows every day. And so
a million new ones in America every year.
Wow. Yeah, I wasn't sure what the facts were, but there's always going to be new widows. And so I'm still here week after week doing the podcast, doing the things, and you're doing all of your stuff because God's given us a story and we want to share it to give people hope that this is not the end. Your life is not over. That's why I always tell people, if you're still here, God still has a purpose, like, for you. And it's not over. In fact, like, some of your best days are yet to come. And I know that's hard to imagine when you've just lost your spouse, but God will give you joy. Like, he gives you this joy that you can't explain to anyone. Like, sometimes, like, I just dance around my house. I'm so happy. And this is not because of Joel. I like to make this clear. This was before Joel. I came to a place of joy and happiness before I got married again. And it's just the joy of the Lord. The joy of the Lord is my strength. And that is how we're able to keep going and keep doing our ministry. And I just want to thank you for doing what you're doing, because we're both going to continue to help countless amounts of people with what we've been through. And so I really appreciate you being here. I know everyone's super excited about your book coming out. So we will be posting about that and all that stuff. There'll be links to get on your newsletter. And so we'll make sure that we get that book. So before you go, is it okay if I pray for you?
Oh, yes, please.
All right. God, I just thank you so much for Lisa. Thank you for the divine way that we met just maybe a week ago. And I just pray blessings over her widow ministry with her book and just all the things that she's doing. I just pray that you continue to give her a platform to share how you have helped her through her darkest times. I pray for her kids that they'll continue to have the peace that passes all understanding. I just thank you for her son and how he's on this track to be a military chaplain. And I pray for her daughter as well. Michelle, and for just her friends, her family, and all the people that she's around, that you continue to shine your light through her. I pray that you continue to show her how you are her husband and love her so much. And we just pray for blessings over her day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, if you liked this podcast, give it a little bing, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. If you would like to be a guest like Lisa was, there's a form you can fill out. We love to have you. It's been amazing. I never am for lack of guests, which is just beautiful. So thank you guys for continuing to volunteer to share your story. If you want to be part of community, there's 2 communities for Widowed Too Soon. I don't even know if Lisa knows this yet, but we have the bigger community, the one that's like 9,000 people. But we created a small one that's only for podcast listeners because for some reason, even though I post it over and over on the other one, people don't know it's a podcast. And it used to be just podcast listeners. So I created one called Widowed Too Soon Podcast Community. And how you join that one is there's a link where you ask me specifically. It's hidden on Facebook, so nobody can find it, which Lisa, I'll send you an invite. But if listeners, you want to be a part of that, there's a link to send me a message and I will get you in that group. And that's just if you're like, I don't want to be in the big one with thousands of people. It's like 60 some people. And it's like actual podcast listeners where we talk about the podcast and other things going on. So anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Widowed Too Soon with Michelle Bader Ebersole. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, rate and review. And we'd also love for you to join our Widowed Too Soon community on Facebook. See you next time.